By the 23rd millennium, humanity's vast galactic federation was on the brink of collapse. The devastating war against the Men of Iron had ravaged human infrastructure and economy across the stars. With its specialized workforce lost and systems failing, the Human Federation was already reeling when the catastrophic warp storms began. These immense psychic disturbances, caused by the imminent birth of the chaos god Slaanesh at the epicenter of the Eldar Empire, effectively isolated Terra from its colonies throughout the galaxy, ushering in the Age of Strife. Over the following 5 millennia, Terra descended into anarchy. The once unified world government fragmented into dozens of warring states ruled by techno-barbarian warlords. These cruel dictators subjugated and brutalized those under their domains, creating a nightmarish landscape reminiscent of ancient China's warring states period, but on an apocalyptic scale. Nuclear and chemical warfare further devastated the already overtaxed planet, transforming Terra into a barren, polluted wasteland. The seas boiled away, mountain ranges were leveled, and ancient cities were reduced to toxic ruins. By the 29th millennium, Terra had become a violent cauldron of competing powers. Techno-barbarian states, many employing dangerous technologies scavenged from humanity's golden age, fought endlessly over the dwindling resources of the cradle of mankind. Genetic manipulation, cybernetic augmentation, and even forbidden warp-based technologies were commonplace among these savage kingdoms. It was during this darkest hour that the being known only as the Emperor decided to emerge from the shadows where he had guided humanity from behind the scenes for millennia. As the warp storms that had isolated Terra began to subside, with Slaanesh's imminent birth, the Emperor recognized the time was right to unite humanity under his leadership and prepare it for the challenges that would come. This Emperor first secured an alliance with the technologically advanced Terrawat clan, gaining access to their formidable weaponry and vast mountain-sized forges. With these resources, he created the first of his genetically enhanced warriors, the Thunder Warriors. These proto-transhumans were physically superior to normal humans in every way, stronger, faster, and more resilient, though crude compared to the Space Marines that would follow them. The Thunder Warriors were organized into 20 regiments, or legions, similar to the later Space Marine legions. Each regiment specialized in different aspects of warfare, such as the Iron Lords of the 4th Legion under Primarch Ushotan, who excelled in siege warfare. Armed with these superhuman soldiers, the Emperor began his conquest of Terra. Among the Emperor's earliest major campaigns was the war against the Moreland Sen Confederacy. This Nordic-based techno-barbarian state unwittingly served the Dark Gods through cannibalistic human sacrifice. The Battle of Moreland Sen, also known as the Battle of the Red Frost, saw the Emperor deploy an entire legion of Thunder Warriors alongside a small cadre of his newly created custodians led by Constantin Valdor. Despite facing a much larger enemy force empowered by foul warp sorcery, the Emperor's forces were victorious. The chronicles record that the Emperor personally executed the Priest King of Moreland Sen, marking one of the first significant victories in the Unification Wars. Soon after, other major campaigns followed. The conquest of the Adedeji dynasty in northeastern Africa, which resulted in the once proud rulers being reduced to factory workers. The subjugation of Albia, whose inhabitants initially refused to kneel before the Emperor and met his forces with their own proto-dreadnoughts and armored Ironside soldiers. The Albians managed to hold back the Emperor's forces in battle after battle, but only at staggering cost. Admiring their martial spirit and indomitable will, the Emperor called for a ceasefire and sought a diplomatic solution. He appeared before the Albion clan lords unarmed, clothed in white and crimson, speaking of his vision of a unified mankind. To the shock of many, the warlords of Albia, seeing the emperor as different from past tyrants, accepted his terms and became one of the most zealous supporters of unification. As the emperor's influence expanded, he encountered increasingly powerful opposition from the major techno-barbarian states. The Kingdom of Ursh, ruled by the tyrannical warlord Caligan, was one of the most formidable opponents the emperor faced. Covering vast territories in what was once Asia and Eastern Europe, Caligan employed powerful psykers in his armies and was known for the ruler's connections to warp entities, which he used as magical weapons. The decisive confrontation came at the 9th Battle of Zosa in the Nordafric conclaves in 992 M29, where inexplicable ephemeral phenomena of psychic origin were encountered. Caligan was finally slain, and Ursh was brought under imperial control. The Pan-Pacific Empire, ruled by the half-mad, half-genius tyrant Nathan Doom, controlled much of what was once the Pacific region. In reality, the empire only controlled half of its claimed territory, with numerous small, techno-barbarian states existing within its borders, unaware they were supposedly part of a vast empire. The last city to fall during the emperor's conquest of the Pan-Pacific Empire was Venori, one of hundreds of merged hive cities jam-packed into the Mariana Canyon, formerly the Mariana Trench. In a rare move, the emperor had Doom executed rather than imprisoned after his defeat. The Indonesic bloc was ruled by the brutal Cardinal Tang, who was eventually defeated by the emperor's forces and imprisoned. The Ethnaki commanded formidable forces, including genetically modified warriors, known as the Urkasis, dangerous Dark Age weapons, and enslaved psykers. The first imperial attempt to capture their strongholds cost the lives of 20,000 Thunder Warriors and 1 million other casualties. Towards the end of the Unification Wars, the Emperor began his second attempt to topple the Ethnaki. The 18th Legion of the Legiones Astartes was tasked with destroying the subterranean power generators feeding the Ethnarchy's power fields in the assault on the Tempest galleries. The mission was nearly suicidal, with Astartes using untested termite burrowing machines to go beneath Terra's surface. Once the shields were down, the Ethnarchy was quickly crushed. Not all of the Emperor's conquests were achieved through direct military action. Several notable examples of diplomatic solutions include the Achaemenid Empire swore allegiance to the Emperor early in his war, thus suffering little during the Unification Wars and avoiding both atomic strikes and invasion by Thunder Warriors. Its population was surprisingly clean from many genetic defects that had affected other tribes. So many of them would later be recruited to become the first Astartes of the Thousand Sons Legion. Boeotia, ruled by the Yesselti dynasty, held out against full unification for some considerable time. While tacitly recognizing the emperor's dominance, the ruling monarchy used all manner of diplomacy to avoid losing power. In a show of great patience, the emperor allowed the Yesselti to carry on like this for over 150 years, with the intention that they would integrate themselves into unified imperial Terra at their own speed. Instead, the Yesselti clung to their independence, eventually forcing the imperial army to invade the province. Finally, Legiones Astartes of the Thousand Sons were assigned to quash the truculent state. Boeotia was notable both for the presence of industry and at least one buried shrine to gods worshipped by humans in an earlier age. As the Unification Wars drew to a close, several significant battles marked the Emperor's final push for total control of Terra. In Frank, Havulek Dagros, the last independent ruler of the territories, led a rebellion against the imperial rulers, killing the Emperor's appointed territorial governor and declaring Frank free once more. The rebellion was crushed at the Battle of Gaduware, where 5,000 Thunder Warriors slaughtered 50,000 rebel militia in what some sources describe as a massacre. Ruled by the despot Dalmuth Kin, High Brazil was one of the last territories to hold out against the Emperor. When Dalmuth finally fell to the Thunder Warriors, Lord Ferrum Sikar was placed in command by order of Malcador the Sigillite and granted a seat on the Council of Terra, ensuring High Brazil would remain loyal to the Imperium. Officially recorded as the final battle of the Unification Wars, the Battle of Mount Ararat was waged against Urartu, the final upstart nation of Old Earth. The battle comprised the entire might of the Thunder Legion, 10,000 Thunder Warriors fighting atop a mountain that had once been underwater. The official chronicles recorded that the famed Thunder Warrior Arik Taranis, known as the Lightning Bearer, raised the banner of lightning at the final declaration of unity before dying of his wounds. The records state that the Thunder Warriors died to the last man to forge the final victory. However, the truth was far darker. By the late stages of the Unification Wars, the Thunder Warriors had realized that the Emperor had engineered them with deliberately short lifespans. Seeing this as betrayal, they turned against their creator. At Mount Ararat, a cadre of several hundred custodians, led by Constantin Valdor, alongside several hundred prototype Astartes of the 1st Space Marine Legion, carried out a merciless culling of the obsolete and rebellious Gene soldiers in an event known simply as the Culling. With Terra unified under his rule by 712 M30, the Emperor began the process of consolidating his power and preparing for the next phase of his grand plan. He set about reconstructing Terra and genetically cleansing humanity of the worst mutations that had proliferated during the Age of Strife. The Emperor enforced his imperial truth across the planet, a secular doctrine that prohibited religious worship in favor of rationality and progress. Churches and religious sites were systematically destroyed, with the Church of the Lightning Stone being the last church on Terra to fall shortly before the Great Crusade. Despite the Emperor's victory, threats to his rule remained. Grand Provost Marshal Uwoma Kandawaya attempted a coup against the established imperial authority, specifically targeting Constantin Valdor of the Legio Custodes, to hold him accountable for the secret destruction of the Thunder Warriors. A group of at least 24 surviving Thunder Warriors under the command of Ushotan, former Primarch of the 4th Legion, participated in the coup to seek revenge for their betrayal and to find an honorable death rather than waiting for insanity or metabolic failure to claim them. The rebels were massacred by the newly created Space Marines in their first openly recognized engagement, while Ushotan was slain in personal combat by Valdor. Surprisingly, Valdor spared Kandawaya and allowed her to leave the palace to retire in peace, an act of mercy unusual for the typically ruthless imperial authorities. One of the few battles of the Unification Wars that took place away from Terra's soil was the Pacification of Luna. Imperial forces took flight to bring war to the Selenar gene cults of Luna, who refused to submit to the Emperor's authority. This attack was waged by the early Astartes legions, with elements of all legions taking part. But it was the 4th Legion that took the lead role in what would be their first recorded campaign. The conquest of Luna marked the Emperor's complete dominion over the Sol system. With Terra and the Sol system secured, the Emperor forged a crucial alliance with the cult Mechanicus of Mars, signing the Treaty of Mars. This historic agreement allowed the tech priests to maintain their autonomy and religious freedom in return for providing the newborn Imperium with the starships, materiel, and war machines it would need to reunite humanity under the Emperor's rule. Construction began on the Astronomicon, a powerful psychic beacon that would allow for safer warp travel and navigation across the stars. The early Imperial army regiments that had served in the Unification Wars continued to serve the Emperor. These regiments, referred to as the Old Hundred, formed the core of the initial military force that embarked upon the Emperor's galaxy-spanning Great Crusade in approximately 798 M30. Alongside his newly created Space Marine legions. The Unification Wars had lasted nearly a century, from the late 29th millennium to 712 M30. Through genetic engineering, military might, diplomatic cunning, and ruthless determination, the Emperor had transformed Terra from a patchwork of warring techno-barbarian states into the unified heart of what would become the Imperium of man. The cost in human lives had been staggering, but in the Emperor's calculus, this sacrifice was necessary to achieve the greater good of unifying humanity and protecting it from the predations of the warp and the hostile Xenos of the galaxy. With the cradle of mankind secure, the Emperor's gaze turned to the stars, and the Great Crusade began in earnest. A campaign to reunite all human-settled worlds under the Imperial banner and reclaim humanity's birthright as masters of the galaxy.